Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. Recently, Bloomberg did a survey of 1,000 rich people. The criteria to be included in the survey: have an income of at least $175,000 a year. Why is that the criteria? Because that's the criteria needed to put you in the top 10% of tax filers in the US. And you might think if you earn an income that puts you in the top 10% of tax filers, it's easy to understand why Bloomberg might label this group as rich. And the overwhelming majority of participants in this group were homeowners, and they had really solid foundational starts when it came to their investments and saving for retirement. So really, it seems like the deck was stacked in their favor to feel like they've reached a certain level of financial success. But surprisingly, less than 25% considered themselves rich. 50% simply classified themselves as comfortable, and 25% considered themselves poor or simply getting by. And I think that can be really insightful. If you earn an income that puts you in the top 10% of US tax filers, the fact that 75% of this group felt poor or simply comfortable is really eye-opening. It makes you wonder, what kind of income would you need to be considered wealthy? And we all know income doesn't tell the whole story. We also have to consider net worth in this equation if we're going to say we've reached a certain level of financial success. And I definitely think calling someone rich is saying they've reached a certain level of financial success, even if it's an arbitrary measure at best. And even with solid incomes, only about 40% of these households had a net worth that surpassed the seven-figure status. And that same survey found that most respondents said they would need almost $2 million for a comfortable retirement. I think when it comes down to assessing of whether you reached rich status or wealthy status or reached financial success, I do think you have to use both measures. I think you have to look at income as well as net worth. And regardless of whatever your income level is, you have to create room within your budget to intentionally save and invest and build wealth over time. Yes, as your income grows, it should be easier to save and invest for the future, but you still have to live within your means, no matter what your income level. There's a handful of reasons why someone making a really solid income might not consider themselves wealthy. First of all, if they're just getting started out on their journey and haven't had the opportunity to build up much in the way of net worth, it could just be that they're in those beginning phases. Other reasons are going to be emotional. There's going to be reasons that are societal, and other ones that are just related to the way you manage money itself. The first elephant in the room that we have to talk about is inflation. The past couple of years, we've been hit hard with inflation, with the prices of goods and services all around us increasing at an accelerated rate. But at the same time, incomes haven't kept pace with these price increases. Let's say back in 2021, you had this benchmark income of $175,000 a year, back before inflation really took off. And let's say present day in 2024, you still have this income of $175,000 a year. You haven't gotten any raises during that time. Well, presently, you would need a household income of over $200,000 to have the same purchasing power from just 3 years ago. So over the past couple of years, if your income didn't increase by 17 or 18%, you actually lost purchasing power. While objectively it may look like you have this good, healthy, strong, solid six-figure income, if your income isn't increasing at the same pace as inflation, your income isn't going as far each year. And I'm certainly not trying to make excuses for not being able to save or invest at this income level. I absolutely think you should be able to. But life doesn't happen in a vacuum. Inflation has hit everyone, and if your paycheck hasn't kept up with inflation, it does get harder to save and invest. And where you live is going to play a huge factor in all of this. Say you make $100,000 a year in New York City. Your income would be 15.7% higher than the area's median. But in Albuquerque, New Mexico, your income would be 71.4% higher than the median. Quite honestly, many of these jobs that pay higher salaries are located in major metro areas where the cost of living is higher, so the salary just doesn't go as far. There's probably a lot more jobs in New York City that pay six figures than there are jobs that pay six figures in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Living in a higher cost of living area comes with higher expenses in the form of housing, transportation, things like that. My best example of this is I'm a Midwest girl, born and raised in Michigan for the first 30 years of my life. When my husband and I started house hunting on the East Coast for our first starter home, the home prices were quite literally double what they would have been back in my Michigan hometown. So if you're going to live in a more expensive area, you're going to need a higher income to meet your needs. $175,000 simply doesn't go as far in, say, California as it does rural Missouri. Income doesn't tell the whole story. We have to consider the context of location. One of the very foundational moves you should take when getting your financial life in order is establishing an emergency fund. Quite simply, life is less stressful when you have an emergency fund. If you don't have an emergency fund, you're kind of living on the edge because inevitably some unexpected expense will come up. Whether it's your furnace breaks, you need a car repair, there's an unexpected tax bill. And if you don't have funds to draw on, it's going to leave you relying on credit cards, which have an incredibly high interest rate, or having to turn to a friend or family to borrow money, which is really a situation you don't want to be in. But the reality is we live in a time where 49% of six-figure earners report living paycheck to paycheck. That is an alarmingly high number of people without a financial safety net. If you don't have a way to cover an unexpected expense, if you are literally spending every single dollar of your paycheck every single month, you're going to find yourself in a real bind when an unexpected expense does come up. I think having an emergency fund is an absolute must for absolutely everyone, regardless of their income level. And if you don't have one set up yet, start contributing to one today. Take $100 from every single paycheck or whatever amount you can and start setting it aside towards this emergency fund. Then start working your way up towards 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. If you have a very reliable job or you live in a dual income earning household, maybe 3 months worth of expenses is perfect for you. If you find yourself at or near retirement, or you have a variable work schedule, or if you're in a single income earning household, maybe 6 months is more appropriate for you. Only you know your situation. Another thing to consider is who exactly are these workers who are earning six-figure incomes? What we really have to consider is that we tend to surround ourselves with friends and families and colleagues who have very similar earnings to us. We tend to have a social circle that looks a lot like us, which is why so many people tend to consider themselves middle class, regardless of their income. Our neighbors and our friends probably take vacations that look a lot like our vacations. We probably live in very similar looking homes. We probably drive similar cars. There's a lot of pressure to fit in, to live a life that looks like the lives of everyone around us. And arguably, the higher your income is, the more pressure you might feel to live a certain lifestyle. Let's say you save up and buy a new home. You move into this new home and all of a sudden your old furniture doesn't look good in the new home. So you turn around and you upgrade your furniture. Then as you're driving home each day, you start to notice that you have the oldest car in the neighborhood. So you upgrade to a new car to go with your new home so you fit in with your neighborhood. This can be an endless cycle that we get trapped in, and it can be a very expensive cycle. I think it can be really hard for people to ever feel like they have enough money. Perhaps you've been able to hit a certain level of net worth. Just for the sake of argument, let's say $1 million because that's the number that's often thrown out there. You've saved, you've invested aggressively, and your account now reads $1 million. At this point, most people don't say, "Oh my goodness, I've made it." Rather, they look at that balance and they say, maybe I should go for 1.5, or maybe I need 2 million. They hit the goalpost, only to find that they've now moved the goalpost and put it further down the road. Rarely do people ever say, "I'm completely satisfied, I have enough." And realistically, most people don't ever hit a level of wealth where they completely stop stressing about money, because life is full of what-if questions. So I think it can be really hard to ever feel like you've reached rich status or wealthy status if you always have this underlying thought of, if I make X amount more, then I'll feel like I've made it. Or if you always have this underlying question of, what if something happens? So in a lot of ways, regardless of your income, regardless of your net worth, I think your thought process and your mentality surrounding your circumstances are going to dictate whether you feel wealthy. And finally, I think we all sort of have this baseline of what we expect in life. And I think this baseline sort of goes up over time. Let's use travel as an example for this. When I was in my 20s, I would happily travel on red-eye flights because they were cheaper. And I would happily stay on friends' couches because my goal was to travel as much as possible, but to keep it as budget-friendly as possible. But over the years, as my income has gone up, I'm no longer willing to take a red-eye. I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my sleep, so I'll pay more for a flight that's midday. I will also pay more to have my own hotel room because I value peace and quiet more these days. My baseline of what I was willing to accept at 20 is very different from what I'm willing to accept 20 years later. And we can talk about this in terms of lifestyle inflation too, because I think if we're all being honest, we don't want to continue living like we're 20 and broke by the time we're 40 or 50. Our baseline of what we deem to be acceptable has shifted up over time, and that's perfectly fine. But what's important is that we keep that baseline on par with our income. It's when your baseline increases too much or your lifestyle inflates too much that you're no longer able to save and invest for your future that it's a problem. There's nothing wrong with raising your standards. There's nothing wrong with a little lifestyle inflation. Just keep it in check with your income. I always use the saying, no matter what your income level, it is possible to outspend at any income level. What's most important is that you keep your lifestyle in check relative to your income. And I actually found it interesting that Bloomberg used income and income alone as a criteria to tell if people were rich, because I don't think income tells the whole story. If you make $500,000 a year, but you spend $500,000 a year, you're going to have nothing left to show for it. There's no doubt about it. Having a high income is a very useful wealth building tool, but you still have to practice good financial habits. What do you think about high income earners still classifying themselves as poor? Leave your thoughts in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye.